Hi, I'm Dr. Boyce Watkins from YourBlackWorld.com, and in case you're wondering why you're hearing background noise, it's because I'm literally in the car, and I just like to record wherever we are, and most of you know who I like to record with when there is something to talk about, and that person is Yvette Carnell. That is my homegirl, my partner in crime, and I have her on the line. Yvette, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing really good. I'm driving from Kentucky to Chicago this week. How about that?
How will it be against you?
Yeah, I'm actually in Indianapolis right now, but I had to call you because I think both of us were literally this weekend about to bust out of our skin when we read some of the transcript from the speech that President Obama gave when he went down to Morehouse College. Now, mind you, I don't think we're in the business of trying to unfairly bash President Obama. He's not a whipping boy, anything like that. And also I think that he should be acknowledged for taking that time to address the young men in Morehouse. We know that Morehouse is one of the most extraordinary schools in the nation. Their president, John Wilson, is an extraordinary man. He backed us on our campaign against mass incarceration along with the other presidents in the AUC. So there's nothing but respect here, and we also have respect for our commander-in-chief. But part of democracy also calls for having an independent voice and speaking that voice freely and honestly, even if it's a voice of dissent. Yvette, I'll start with you and your article that you wrote. You took some issue with parts of the president's speech. Now, the president, from what I understand, gave a speech, and this is from what I read as well, that the gist of it was, work hard and you can accomplish anything, which you and I both agree with. But then there was sort of a conversation about race and using racism as an excuse for not succeeding, and also the mention of, which is a consistent theme in the president's speech, a mention of his father, the quote-unquote deadbeat dad that the president had to overcome. Can you talk a little bit about your article and some of the issues that you had with the speech?
Well, first of all, there were so many issues, but let's just address the first one. The first problem is how President Obama addresses black people, whether they're black students or black people at the church or black people wherever, as opposed to how he addresses other people. He used the word excuse at least 4 times, and that's when I stopped counting. It is. I've seen President Obama do other speeches, other commencement addresses. He wouldn't go to Stanford. He wouldn't go to Yale and tell those people that they should not, use excuses, as if that's something that they're preparing to do, as if the men of Morehouse are preparing to leave here today and use excuses for why they can't get ahead or why they won't get ahead. These guys have achieved something. This is the day to celebrate their achievement, not to tell them what they can't do and what they shouldn't do. But the second thing that I really took issue with was, in the speech, Obama said something about, I know you all have been told by people in your family that you're going to have to work twice as hard. And the first problem I have with that, and we've all heard that from black people in our family, you're going to have to work twice as hard. But the first problem I have about that is if you can't say that to black people in a black forum, and then when we come to you and ask you to deal with the black agenda, say, oh, I'm not the president of black people, I'm the president of all people. Well, when you come to Morehouse, be the president of all people, not just the president of black people. Don't come with any black adages or any black talk. Just be the president of all people and give black people the commencement speech that they deserve. But, there are really a lot of problems embedded into that whole, let me give black speak. Let me talk to black men about what goes wrong in their community. Let me talk to black men about not being lazy. Or let me talk to black men about not making excuses, as if that's who black people are racially, as if there's something in black men's DNA that says they're automatically lazy. Let me tell these black men before they graduate, don't you go doing any of that, stuff that black men do. And you don't get any of that anywhere else. You don't see that. He alluded to that when he went to Chicago. He was talking about the killings, but he didn't say anything about that when he went to Sandy Hook. So I think I am just sort of tired of that. And I really am sort of tired of the issue that Obama has with the father who allegedly abandoned him, because I have a problem with that because his mother took him to live with his grandparents. And nobody says, wow, why'd you do that? Because when Shaniqua does that, when she takes her kids to live with their parents and leaves them there for a while or however long, she's berated. But when his mother does it and she's a white woman, she's celebrated. So there's just so much hypocrisy in this. It's just kind of mind-boggling to me.
Well, it's such an interesting thing because I think that we become addicted to racism in the sense that we just kind of know things are going to be unfair. We look at structural racism. We don't see it as something that we can change and impact. And, and so the sort of, what would we call it? In mathematics, we actually have a term for that, kind of the static solution to the problem, meaning, when you don't have the ability to change the other side of the equation, all you can do is manipulate the side that you're on. And what that means is that if you know structural racism is out there and you're not going to change it anytime soon, then you have to accept the fact that you're going to have to work twice as hard to get half as much. You have to accept the fact that making excuses is not going to get you very far in this world. And so some of what the president said is not any different from what I say to my own children. It's similar to what we've heard lots of black people say. When I spoke with Minister Farrakhan in our forum in Chicago, that's exactly what he said. He had a very similar message. The problem with that message, though, is that, as you mentioned, President Obama does not have a willingness to try to play on both sides of the equation. Structural inequality is not just this horrible thing that he's victimized by or something that he can't control, he can't impact. He's the president of the United States. He's the most powerful black man in the history of the earth. That means that if he does not have the ability to confront some of these structural obstacles, then nobody does. And I agree with you. I think that, it's very interesting that when I heard the president speak at my daughter's commencement last year at Columbia University, and at that point, he's pandering to a white female audience. And, of course, the conversation is going to go toward, reproductive rights and liberal issues like gay marriage and things like that. The speech was not anything like that speech. There was no don't use this as an excuse and this sort of like this almost a little bit of berating. And again, I'm not totally against the idea of berating people in the sense of tough love. Sometimes you have to, get pretty tough with people. And, but I think that a guy like, I compared it to a guy like a Chris Rock or Harry Belafonte or a Louis Farrakhan or a Jesse Jackson. They can do that. They can tell black folks, get off your butt, stop being lazy, this is what's wrong with you, because they're also going to go outside of their room, and when they confront white America, they're going to be just as firm in their commitment to defending black America against racism and oppression. The president doesn't show that same degree of resilience. He tends to, unfortunately, fold and buckle to the interests of white America. And my argument is that this guy, he's half black, absolutely. So he has a right to come into a space of black men and be accepted just like anybody else. But he's also half white. What are you doing when the white boys are in the room? When you see the white guys oppressing black people, do you speak up? And do you berate them the same way you berate us, or do you fold and buckle like a coward? Do you accept institutionalized racism as just something that should be allowed to exist? If that's the case, then if you're going to pander on one side, you need to pander all the way around. So that would be my argument on the issue.
Well, I was honestly floored when he brought up that work twice as hard. And I've heard, like I said, I've heard the work twice as hard argument from a lot from elderly black people in terms of how to get ahead and how to make a life for yourself. But that's because the elderly black people that I know don't have the power to change the system. The only thing that they can do is do what they can from where they are. You are the president of the United States. What you should be telling me is what you're doing to change the twice as hard double standard that black men and black women have to deal with. You should be telling me what you're doing to change racial inequality so that I don't have to work twice as hard, because that's unfair for me to have to work twice as hard as the next white person to get ahead. So you're in a position of power, and you're the first black president, and you're telling me to my face that I'm still going to have to work twice as hard with any conversation of what you're doing to make sure that that doesn't happen, what you're doing to ameliorate racism. I mean, when you do that to me, you're showing me that you're powerless, that you're powerless in the face of racial equality and in the power in the face of racism. So my question to Barack Obama would be, why are you even there? If you can't tell me what moves you're making to move in direction, I just don't see why you're there. And in terms of being an African American, my problem with Barack is that he only shows up as an African American when it's time to talk about us. When it's time to tell us not to be lazy, when it's time to give a Father's Day speech, and tell black men to be there for your kids, no one is there when it's scorn black people. But when it's time to help black people out, when it's time to talk about double-digit unemployment, you're nowhere to be found. When that happens, then all of a sudden you're the president of all people. But when somebody has something negative to say, here you come. And I think black people should just get tired of accepting that sort of duplicity from the president of the United States.
Well, I can't argue with you on that. I mean, I'm kind of saddened by the speech, and in a way, it's almost like if your child, wants to fight the bully, and you tell your child, no, you don't fight back the bully, you just take the punches because the bully's going to beat you up anyway, and the parent does nothing to protect you from the bully. They just let you keep getting beat up. It's like, if you're going to berate me, at least work with me, support me, help protect me. Use your power to help us alleviate this inequality. Like, I can't see the president going to the gay community and saying, well, that America's just not going to let y'all get married. That's just not going to happen. So what y'all have to learn how to do is just really love each other and make do with it. Your parents and grandparents will tell you that the country will never accept gay people as equals, and that's just the way it's going to be. And I think that's kind of what he's saying to us. With any time you have an individual in that position of power who speaks to a group of black people and says, it insinuates that you're going to have to work twice as hard to get the same as everybody else, that person does not believe that racial equality is a priority, or that racial equality is achievable. That's not something that they're aiming for. The president should be saying that it's a shame that you're going to have to work twice as hard to get the same amount. He should be saying that, as Morehouse men, I know that you men are competent and hardworking and qualified, and I'm going to do what I can to make sure that you have the same opportunities that you would have if you were white kids graduating at Emory University right down the street. And so, I think that, because here's the other funny thing. It's interesting, when I hear that dynamic of, when I hear black people sort of applauding the president kind of being hard on black people and telling them what's wrong with them, I see a couple of things happen. And the first thing I see is people applaud. It's almost like when I heard a woman explain why she doesn't get offended when a rapper uses the word bitch in a song. She says she doesn't get offended because he's not talking about me. So him calling me a bitch is very different from him him saying where the bitch is at. Because in her mind, she's thinking he's not talking about me, he's talking about that other girl over there. I think the same thing is true when the black elite hear the president give a speech about lazy, incompetent black people, sort of as if it's our fault that racism exists. That racial inequality exists because we are not qualified. I mean, that's the fundamental premise of white supremacy, that white people are better and superior, and that's why inequality exists. So when the president makes that statement to the black elite, those individuals clap in many cases because they're not assuming the president is talking about them. They're assuming the president is talking about that Negro over there, that guy who doesn't have a job, that guy who's in prison, that guy who didn't go to Morehouse. He didn't get into Morehouse because he didn't work as hard as me. He's not as smart as me. But here's the other dynamic that I think is very important to keep in mind when we analyze what the president says and all this other stuff, is that one of the things that people need to really talk about and remember when we hit these issues is that there are millions of highly qualified black people who work extremely hard, who jumped through the hoops, who went to the right schools, who got all the education, got all the training, went to the job, played the role like a fiddle, played it perfectly, did exactly what they're supposed to do, who still didn't get opportunities. who still got laid off from their jobs. I can't tell you how many professors I know in my field alone, not to mention doctors, lawyers, and other people I know who didn't get promoted and who worked because they were working in an academic department that had not hired a black person in 80 years. And so my issue is, what are you going to do to address this very blatant, very clear workplace discrimination that exists in America? When you see study after study that shows that when black people commit the same crimes as whites, we get longer prison sentences, how in the hell are you going to look at that data and then turn around and say that the reason y'all go to prison is because y'all commit more crimes? You are directly contradicting what the studies are saying. So the president, I don't know what's really going through his head on this, and I'm not into spending all my time trying to attack or go after Barack Obama and all that stuff, but I really think that we can't allow this kind of BS. The first step toward equality is our commitment to demanding that we be treated the same way as everybody else. If you give a commencement speech in Morehouse, no, you're not coming in there as a black man. You're coming in there as the president of the United States. You were the president of all people when you were in Washington, and when you picked that all-white cabinet that you had for a while until you finally appointed a black person, you were the president of all people then. You need to be the president of all people now. You don't get to come in there and pull out your black card and say, hey, since I'm one of y'all, I'm going to just make white people happy by bashing you all. But yet, when I go back to Washington, I'm not going to defend you. I'm not going to represent you. I'm not even going to say your name because guess what? I'm going to be around just like a baby. It's just like a broke baby's daddy who wants to be around when it's time to have sex, but he don't want to be around when it's time to raise the baby. President Obama cannot treat the black community like a baby's mama. I refuse to accept that. I'm going to stop talking, Yvette. What would you like to say?
Well, I just want to have one last word just to say that I want everybody to really understand that this is nothing new. The black elite have kind of kicked around the black poor for a very long time, and you see that going back to everybody's hero, Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington basically said that the answer to white supremacy in terms of how black people were to get over white supremacy was to acquiesce to it. Put down your buckets and go to work and it'll all go away. And that has never worked. These things are structural. And you answer this with a policy prescription. You answer structural racism with a policy prescription. And there's nothing wrong with black people, in terms of, look at some black people do make bad decisions. People say that. Some black people make bad decisions. Some white people make bad decisions. And when you look at people in poverty across the world, they all act out the very same way. There's nothing no different from poor black people to poor Hispanics and poor white people. If you look at the ghettos and white communities, when we had white immigrants in this country around the time of the New Deal, they were acting out in the same way. The only difference is the New Deal ushered those white people to middle class fairly quickly, and black people were forced to wait to the 50s. 20 years later to get their part of the New Deal. So that's why you see a little bit more of certain things in the black community, because we're still not there yet. But that's not our fault. So, this whole idea that racism is our fault and that what's happening to us is because we just can't get our stuff together is insidious. And we should just get rid of that right now. This whole, we're just talking about just black people or just something wrong with us and we make bad decisions. No, we don't. We have disproportionate amount of people who are poor, and poor people are forced to make certain types of decisions. And that's just the way it is, and we should just look at that.
Right, I agree with you. At the end of the day, unfortunately, as a community, we kind of have battered wife syndrome. We kind of have become so accustomed to being abused that, when we are abused, we tend to look at ourselves more critically than we look at other people. I think that it's interesting when you talk about a Booker T. Washington solution to racial oppression. I'm not completely disconnected to that model in the sense that I do think that the promotion of hard work and a firmer set of cultural standards and norms can help us advance as a people, period. I think that the Jewish community does well because they have the cultural mechanisms that lead them to prosperity under almost any conditions, it seems. And I applaud that, and I think we can grow from that. But I think that for us to look at oppression as if whites have a right to oppress us, that's where we have to get off the boat with that. We can't sort of pick up our buckets and walk away from structural racism and forgive structural racism and allow it to exist. We must fight structural racism while at the same time pushing each other to elevate our game so that we can conquer whatever structural racism does exist. You know, I think that, again, that's why I think that a Chris Rock or a Farrakhan, I use Chris Rock because I consider him to be more intelligent than most other comedians, and I believe that he's really trying to do commentary in his comedy, and I like to reference that because, you know, I see him, for example, as a guy who on one hand will tell you what's wrong with black people. We all know that there's something wrong with these ex-slaves running around with a slave mentality. We know that there's something wrong with us as a people. You know, now white folks got their own issues. We know that too. But we know that we have our issues and we have to work through them. But at the same time, if you look at a Chris Rock, he'll also turn around and tell you what's wrong with white America, what's wrong with their racism, and why we have to fight that. So I think that President Obama, in my opinion, I would have no problem with him coming back and giving that exact same speech if I saw him in Washington in front of a group of white men showing that same courage, that same tenacity with his white brothers and sisters, because he is white. He's a white man. He's a white man and he's a black man. He's both. Good for him. So when you go stand in front of your white colleagues and they're looking at you like a black man and treating you in a certain way, how much courage do you have there? If you can't stand up to them, then I don't want to hear what you got. You don't come back talking tough when you're going to go back to Washington and buckle and fold every time somebody seeks to oppress the people that you claim to represent. And that's it. You know, it's really no different from like a man who doesn't pay any bills in the household, is never there for his kids, but yet he wants to come home every Christmas and act like he's the father, the head of the household. No, you got to earn that respect, buddy. And President Obama, unfortunately, does not yet have the moral authority to give any speech that's anything like that. Harry Belafonte, I believe, could have went in there and gave a very similar speech, and I think it would have been applauded. I wouldn't have criticized it at all, because I know Harry Belafonte has stood up to the power structure in terms of trying to change the racism that we're dealing with every day. President Obama, unfortunately, has failed that test, and we as a people have failed our test because we've let him off the hook. We've basically made an agreement that says we're going to support you, we're going to give you all of our votes, we're going to give you all of our backing, and we don't feel entitled to ask you for anything to do for us because we're so self-conscious about being called, about being considered welfare recipients or asking for a handout. So we're going to just sit back quietly and allow you to take our votes and use them to serve white people, gay people, Latino people, and everybody else. But while white unemployment has gone way down since the recession began, black unemployment has gone up under the first black president, and that's just a fact that we cannot ignore, we cannot deny. We have to really talk about that. I'm done talking, Yvette. I'll let you get the last word if you have anything else to say.
No, I just wanted the only thing I would say is that I don't believe that there's anything wrong. I don't believe in race essentialism. So when somebody tells me, you know, there's something wrong with black people, I immediately push back against that. You know, there may be certain characteristics that you see in poor people. There may be certain characteristics that you see in celebrities. I see certain characteristics in rock stars, you know, in terms of the way that they lead their lives and the drugs and, you know, that sort of things that I see in Lil Wayne in the scissors and stuff like that. So I think there may be a cultural problem in America. I think there may be certain things that are endemic to being poor in America. But I don't see it as a black thing. And I just refuse to let people lob that onto black people as if the things that happen to us in our lives or the way in which, you know, we carry out our lives and what we don't achieve is because there's something wrong with us that just kind of comes along with brown skin and kinky hair. So that's just my last word on it.
All right. Well, you know, I think that was a great last word, and that really was the last word. A lot of times I give a last word, and it ends up being longer than it should be. So I'm going to just be quiet and let people make their own decisions about this. And I encourage people to just be open-minded. You know, that's all we ask people to do. We're not like some of these other outlets that are working for the Democratic Party or working for some corporation trying to get you to think a certain way. That's not our job. Our goal is not to get you to agree with us. It's to get you to think for yourself. And unfortunately, that's not what a lot of these oppressive forces want you to do. They want to control your thinking, and that's just not what we're all about. So thank you very much, Yvette. I really appreciate your time.
No problem.
All right, and thank you all for checking us out at yourblackworld.com. And until we meet again, please stay strong, be blessed, and be educated. We are gone.